The day is finally here. Oh yes, it's Rocket Lake Day. And before we start, yes, it is still 14 nanometer. I know. Let's do this. With its luxurious curves, the AOC Agon AG353 UCG is not just a pretty picture. Featuring a wide quad HDR 1000 display at 200Hz and G-Sync Ultimate, you too can game your way to victory. Check the link in the description to find out more. So according to the internet, which means it must be true, AMD made huge gains over Intel on desktop processors last year, going from 17% in 2016 to 39% in 2020, according to one set of findings, while another actually showed them neck and neck at about 50% each. So what are we meant to believe? Who are we meant to believe? Well, it all depends on what we're actually talking about. Desktop processors is one thing, but enthusiast DIY processors, well, that's a completely different kettle of fish. Get it? Fish? Lake? I was trying to be punny, all right? So Intel actually sent out their press kit, which I'm sure you guys have seen about 1 million times over. Inside is the Core i5 11600K and the flagship i9 11900K. For perspective, at least on an MSRP price side of things, which basically means jack lately, the 11600K is coming in at $262 compared to its rival, the 5600X from AMD, which comes in at about $299, though currently I've seen it more for about $350 to $399. The 11900K is coming in at $539, while its competitor, the Ryzen 9 5900X, comes in at $549, so basically on par. But maybe Intel are hoping to capitalise by being that little smidge cheaper. So spec-wise, how does it all actually stack up? Well, let's talk about the 11600K to start with. That comes with 6 cores and 12 threads, with a base clock of 3.9 GHz and a max boost of 4.9. So 100 MHz faster than a 10600K on boost, but 200 MHz slower on the base clock. Compared to AMD's 5600X, it's faster in both clock speeds, but comes with a 95 watt TDP, compared to AMD's 65 watts. So things are looking, I guess, in favour for Intel when it comes to performance, but temperatures and power could be a completely different story. Now, looking at the 11900K, that comes in with 8 cores and 16 threads, with a base clock of 3.5 GHz and a max boost turbo of 5.3 GHz, thanks to boost and TVB, thermal velocity boost, but we'll never actually see that speed on every thread concurrently. It's a tough thing to kind of understand, so I'll just let you go visit the Intel website and you can find out all of the information on all of their various different boost technologies. Now, compared to the 10900K, this chip has actually kind of gone a little bit backwards. It now has 2 less cores and 4 less threads, and the base frequency has actually dropped by 200 MHz. What are you doing, Intel? Apparently, Intel have actually found a way to improve in other areas, and it's not all about cores, threads, and speed anymore. Let's call it magic, or voodoo. Now, compared to AMD's 5900X, it's not looking good on paper, as that comes with 12 cores and 24 threads. Although it does only come with a max boost clock of 4.8 GHz. But again, comes with a lesser TDP, 105 watts, which is actually 20 watts less than the 11900K. So with all the kind of boring stuff out the way, and I guess on paper it could be pretty much anyone's bag, less cores but faster cores, but how does that actually translate to performance? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's run them glorious benchmarks. So benchmarks out the way, let's break it down bit by bit, starting with the 11600K. For the most part, AMD slaughters it in pretty much every test, with a few exceptions, though the 11600K does come in $30 cheaper. So does that mean the 5600X is $30 better? Well, when it comes to synthetics, it was a bit of a mixed bag. Rendering and calculation tests, the AMD was simply better, thanks to its multi-core enhancements. And then when you start looking at gaming, the 5600X simply smashed the 11600K. In some cases by pretty large margins. In terms of power consumption and temperatures, Intel won something. Yes, come on. If having the highest number is better. Sadly, in this case, it's not. And the 5600X came out on top again at load, and the lower TDP helped with temperatures as well. Now, when it comes to the flagship, the daddy, the i9, the 11900K, it's basically on par with AMD, and all depends on what task you're actually running. Now, looking at our whole suite, in some tests, AMD beat it, and in others, Intel came out on top. It does look like AMD kind of have multi-core applications sewn up by quite some margin. Just looking at Cinebench, for instance, with a multi-score lead of over 2,000 points. But then we see Intel taking it back in single-threaded performance, which is something Intel actually specifically set out to do. Now, moving to the all-important thing, gaming. You could argue that they are quite evenly matched, depending on how many titles you actually tested. Some are going to be geared better for multi-thread, some more for kind of single-thread. It really depends on what you're doing. Now, the big thing comes down to power and temperatures. We run our power and temperature tests using Cinebench R20. It's a great way of taxing the CPU in extremely complex workloads, and that 125 watt TDP really doesn't do Intel any favors at load. At idle, I was actually blown away. The various C states that are enabled by default really do allow the chips to run lower at idle. And on the flip side, AMD could look, I guess, a little bit higher because of their aggressive voltage range that they actually use. Honestly, look in your BIOS, it'll be like 1.45 volts. At load, it is a different story. AMD doesn't just sit below the 11900K, but also sits below the 10900K. When it comes to temperatures, it's very much the same story. I mean, yes, the 11900K runs hotter, of course it does. It's a 14 nanometer chip, but it's still perfectly acceptable. And remember, this is a worst case scenario running Cinebench R20, and it was still fine on our Noctua D15S. The fan didn't even get a chance to ramp up to bring them temperatures back down. So you had reasonable temperatures and near silent operation. Another key thing that Intel were keen to show off was Adaptive Boost Technology, or ABT. This is available on both the i9, 11900K and KF SKUs. And basically, if your system has the appropriate power delivery and cooling, it will actually allow ABT to come into effect. This is in addition to Thermal Velocity Boost, Turbo Boost Max 3.0, and Intel Turbo Boost 2.0. So we wanted to see exactly how it would compare with it on and off. So let's run them. So let's sum things up, starting with the 11600K. I'm not even sure what Intel were thinking with this chip. It simply can't compete, whether you're gaming, editing, rendering, calculating. Yes, it's cheaper, not by much, and it is an improvement on the last generation 10600K, but it's just not a viable option compared to what AMD have on this level, which is mainstream gaming, I guess. The saving grace for Intel is due to the fact that they have their own fabs. Stock might, and it's a very, very big might, actually be okay for them. So when faced with what one to buy, well, with the way that things are going right now, it could just be down to which one you can get hold of. Sorry guys, that's just kind of the true harsh facts of things at the moment. I have got a whole video explaining all that, so definitely check it out. With the 11900K, it's a completely different story. Across our whole benchmark suite, it held its own and battled AMD tooth and nail. By my own calculations, the 11900K and the 5900X, which are similar prices, hence why we compared them, they won and lost as many benchmarks as each other. Again, the Intel wins on idle temperatures and power consumption, but loses by quite some margin at load. Now, you may also be wondering, Andy, where are your overclocking results? Where are they? I need to see them. Well, two reasons. One, I didn't have time. Secondly, I honestly believe that overclocking for the average consumer is dead. And that's what we try to bring at eTeknix, the type of thing that consumers will buy and do. Boost technologies are kind of so advanced now, especially Intel on the 11900. It's got like 5 different boost technologies. And it's best leaving kind of as is, unless you're striving for world records or just a friendly bit of fun with your friends who can, you know, kind of get the better results, that kind of thing. I will end up on this whole video saying 2 things. One being the fact that we now have a viable Intel option in terms of features like PCIe Express Gen 4, Wi-Fi 6E, Thunderbolt, and much more when paired with the latest Z590 motherboards. And in some cases, Z490 motherboards, albeit on the higher end or brand specific. And the performance is there too, at least on the 11900K. The i5, that's just, different story. What is funny though, and I've said this time and time again, Intel's 14nm plus however many are now competing with AMD's 7nm process and showing that they can bring the fight. So with Alder Lake S destined for a Q4 launch this year, bringing us 12nm CPUs, DDR5, single and multi-threaded improvements, better power optimizations, potential PCI Express Gen 5 and much more, I honestly think AMD should be looking to the future and maybe even worrying just a little bit. Was this all part of Intel's master plan? Do they see this as a stopgap before Alder Lake? Let me know what you guys actually think in the comments below. Maybe I'm going crazy, but that's kind of how I see it. You still have to remember the i9 11900K and the Ryzen 9 5900X are still classed as niche products in the grand scheme of things. The funny thing is, the CPU I'm most looking forward to, I didn't even have it here, and that is the i5 11400F. 6 cores, 12 threads, 4.4 GHz boost, 65 watt TDP, all for under $160. Now that is exciting. Let me know what you think. If you like this video, you know exactly what to do, and I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye-bye. Get out. i5. There.